Enough time has passed. Fischl is the second best character in the game. Xingqiu? Shit. Everyone is throwing out their hot takes due to lack of content, and now I'll throw out mine. This is probably going to be my most scrutinized video I've released in a while, as pretty much everyone I've brought this up with disagrees. But I'll try to show and present my argument, and you are free to disagree. Honestly, I expect you to disagree with me, but I still think I have a valid enough argument to warrant you listening. So let's get into it. Hello there, Flip here, and today, time to unleash hell. Yes, I think Fischl is currently the second best character in the game, right behind Bennett, of course, and also assuming C0 5 stars, because you can get into fuck off ranges with some of the cons. And yes, that means I value Fischl more than I value Raiden, Kazuha, Ayaka, Ganyu, Sucrose, and yes, the resident femboy Xingqiu. And I think Fischl should be classified as a character that has a core unit, like how Bennett and Xingqiu are classified. And in order to really have a grasp on why I think Fischl is better, I'll do an overview of her kit, and then there are certain matchups I have to win, like with Raiden vs Fischl, Xingqiu vs Fischl, any hyper carry versus Fischl, and any Verdescent unit versus Fischl. But before we get into that, as always, standard YouTube practices, if at any point during the video you're entertained, make sure to drop a like and even consider subscribing because of the hellhole I'm diving into by opening this topic. Now let's go on to look at Fischl's merits. Firstly, I assume we all know how Fischl works. You press your skill, Oz comes out, he shoots electro shit at enemies, and then eventually boops out of existence and then you resummon him with your burst. Fischl is a very simple character to use, but one thing Oz has that no other summonable entity has, I think, is that you can reposition him, which is very valuable in multi-wave content, as unlike Kokomi or Goba, Oz will consistently hit the enemies which deals high single target damage. And if you are running a tenacity build, then you get better uptime on it. Another thing this reposition comes in handy with is snapshotting. Oz is snapshottable, so if you've accidentally placed him without buffs at the beginning of a rotation, no worries, you can just replace him and now have that buff. So far already, Fischl already has some strong points. Now couple that in with a few things like her energy generation, which is really strong, and allows her to parry characters with a high burst cost like Beidou and Yai. Now add in that Fischl also applies a good rate of Electro, especially with her C6, meaning that any team comp that would need an Electro could take her. And this actually extends out to teams that don't need an Electro, because I stand by Fischl being the best flex slot in the game, as she can be slotted into any team that isn't Frieza reverse melt without bringing any downsides to the team, including ER, because as Fischl's burst is just a recast of her skill, it effectively means she has no ER requirement for around 3 rotations. Which, if you can't tell, is pretty fucking nuts. Even other flexible units like Kazuha and Bennett can underperform or extend rotations due to funneling. But with Fischl you don't really have to worry about it. Oh yeah, and also Fischl happens to do a straight despicable amount of damage. On most teams you slot Fischl on, she normally does 20 to 30% of the team's DPS in single target from looking at Genshin simulators. However, do note that these numbers tend to be somewhat inaccurate, but they do give a good baseline. And the reason why Fischl is essentially shitting out single target DPS is because she actually does add to her own damage from a lot of sources that all scale well with her attack. Her second constellation yeets 200% of her attack at enemies with your skill cast. Her C4 does the same thing but with her burst, but it's 220% of her attack this time. And yes, you've probably heard the machine gun jokes, but yes, Fischl C6 makes her a turret. And then on top of this, you have a talent I don't see anyone really talk about, which is Fischl's A4, and this essentially is an elemental reaction in itself. Now this talent doesn't look that broken, it only says 80% of Fischl's attack. But the thing is that this is only really limited by the rate of elemental reactions, which for transformatives is 0.5 seconds. And I have checked to see a CD timer, and it does seem to proc on each different reaction, so it actually could be less than 0.5 seconds, but I'm too stupid to really count it. And now that we have covered all of Fischl's strengths, let's compare it to other characters, and the easiest one to knock out for me are hyper carries, which includes Ayaka, Ganyu, etc. When looking at supports and sub DPS compared to hyper carries, I think the easiest way to argue Fischl's value and strength above them is her core to comps and how many comps she can fit in. When looking at any team in the game that utilizes an electro reaction, Fischl is the character you go to, and it's been that way since the very beginning of the game, which I'll discuss a bit more in my Raiden section. But yeah, Fischl's role as an electro applicator will most likely not be offset by another electro character that is as self-sustainable as Fischl. Let's look at soup teams, overvape teams, taser teams, fuck it, even overload teams. Fischl is 95% of the time going to be the option you use. And I'm Sensing I'm probably going to get someone clueless that says Electro isn't meta, or Electro is a bad element, which I've debunked in another video of mine, but teams that can utilize Electro reactions well, and proc a lot of transformative reactions scale really well, and as I said, Fischl is on a majority of those teams where Electro is needed. And Fischl even complements DPS like Shoutout, Yoimiya, Zhao, Eula, Raiden, Ito, the list goes on, basically any character that isn't Cryo. And because of that, I see her as more valuable than any hyper carry just because she can carry more than her own weight in a team, and her presence will be felt on the team she goes in because of her high damage and the amount of reactions that she triggers. Moving on to Animo characters. Alright, this is gonna be a bit harder to fully convey, as both Fischl and Animo characters are pretty dependent on each other for their comps. Let's look at Thundering Fury Kazuha, Sucre's Taser, Soup teams in general, Sukokomon, Electrocharge Raiden. Both Verdescent characters like Venti, Kazuha, and Sucrose, and Fischl have around the same amount of meta teams, and both offer so much to their respective meta teams. Also, as I said before, in Fischl's favor, she can work in non-reaction teams like Mono Geo, or Eula for example. And for me, when judging current value and value in the future, I have to give it to Fischl because she's close to irreplaceable on her teams. When another Electro character needs a battery, Beidou, Yai, and all future Electro characters that will be a DPS will most likely want a Fischl, and their comps will be balanced around her. I just see Fischl being the core to most teams that will simply just use the Electro elements more valuable than what Verdescent provides, but that is just my thoughts and I can understand disagreeing. Next, let's talk about Raiden. First, I just need to say, Raiden did not replace Fischl at all. The most Raiden did was give another core to Eula teams, but in some scenarios, Fischl can be better, and vice versa. Comparing Raiden and Fischl is like comparing Child and Jingcho in a way. When Child is on field, he applies a lot of his element, and he doesn't apply as much off field, same with Raiden. Jingcho applies his element mostly off field, same with Fischl. In fact, instead of comparing Raiden and Fischl, just run them together. Slap your Raiden and Fischl together with an Animo character and a Hydro, and you get a team that is really strong in both single target and AoE. And moving back on to the reason why I think Fischl is better than Raiden would just be recycling my old points, because Raiden has two sides, her hyper carry side and her driving side, which I previously established why I think Fischl is more valuable than hyper carries, and Raiden also has her supporting side in which Fischl is just a better Electro support than Raiden. When slotting Raiden on a team, her damage would have to make up for the fact that she extends rotations, and Fischl just applies more Electro than Raiden over an entire rotation, meaning she's more favored. And now, let's move on to Jingcho. I think I'm just gonna say it, Jingcho has lost quite a bit of value. I think the reason why Jingcho was so highly regarded in the beginning of the game was because Hydra was an element that was very sought after, but Jingcho was the only one that could apply it consistently off field. So for Vape teams you would run Jingcho, Taser and Soup team Jingcho, and even Freeze if you didn't have your Mona yet you would play it with this femboy. But now the character landscape has changed drastically, and for Freeze you run Kokomi. For Taser and Soup, Aito is really good, but Jingcho on Taser and Soup is generally still a bit better. And then for the only Vape team that matters you run Child, fuck Hu Tao. And then we also have Yelan coming out, and that might just make things even worse. But it's essentially gone to the point where if you pull two limited Hydra characters, you almost have no more use for Jingcho, in which the same can't be said for Fischl, because currently there are no options to replace her. Also, don't get me wrong, Jingcho is still a top 3 character obviously, and some teams are dependent on him, but the only thing he really has over the other Hydra units is the fact that he's a 4-star, and the others are limited 5-star characters. And the only two things he really has over Fischl is that he has higher raw damage and Hydra is a more valuable element. But again, with the Hydra point, there are currently Hydra options that are just better than Jingcho in some scenarios, diminishing his value. And then Fischl has access to a wider range of comps, no energy issues, no real side grades, can be used on more teams than Jingcho where she can give full value. A better flexibility in build options, more free to play options, is essentially farmed passively as she can use a multitude of sets, and she also increases in value with each character added, and pairs well with them, whereas the last character Jingcho really paired well with was Raiden. And that is why I think Fischl now cements herself as the second best character in Genshin. You are of course free to disagree, I don't expect that many people to agree with me on this point if I'm being honest. And on that note, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment who your top 3 meta characters are in Genshin, as I'd love to hear it and I respond to almost every single comment. Once again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.
Stay with me, little bitch, yeah, you know that I'm meant to be